His first memory in his new life was the smell of milk. His second was the sound of a bell. His third was the realization that he was a grown man in the body of a 2-year-old child, lying in a cradle with gilded edges, in a room where portraits of stern ancestors looked down at him with stony gravity. His name was Veal Ardo Montwine. In his past life, he was simply known as an engineer, 44 years old, a heart attack in the office on Friday evening, before he could finish his coffee. Veal didn't cry, not because he was brave. He was just curious. Magic existed in this world. He realized this quickly, even before he learned to speak again. Servants moved objects with their gaze. In the mornings, his father recited spells in front of the mirror the way others read the newspaper. His mother once froze a glass of water with a snap of her fingers. It was a different world, and Veal began to study it. With the methodical precision of an engineer. With the curiosity of a man who had been given a second chance. The Montvains were not the most noble family in the kingdom of Alver, but they were respected. A military aristocracy. 3 generations of commanders. The family motto, strength in the blade, honor in the blood. Veal learned all this by the age of 3. By 5, he had mastered languages, his native Alverian and the trade tongue. By 6, he had read the entire castle library, including the tedious household ledgers that everyone else ignored. The household ledgers turned out to be the most useful. The Montvain lands produced grain and horses. They were poor at trade. Taxes were collected unevenly. The castle's maintenance costs exceeded its income by 18%. Veal presented a report to his father at the age of 6. His father, Count Nordis Montvain, a broad-shouldered man with horizontal eyebrows and a habit of measuring everything by force, looked at him for a long time. "Did you go over the ledgers?" "Yes." "Why?" "Because it's interesting." "That's no pastime for an aristocrat." Veal wanted to object, but he looked at his father's eyebrows and kept quiet. He remembered. At the age of 8, all children of noble birth underwent the ritual of revelation. A special diagnostic mage would come to the castle, make a small cut in the child's palm, observe how the blood interacted with the reagent, and announce the type of magic. There were many types. Combat magic was valued above all else. Fire, lightning, wind, earth. That was what the aristocrats dreamed of. Restorative magic was respected. Healers were needed in war. Administrative magic wasn't bad. The magic of influence, contracts, auras. Manufacturing magic was considered useless. It allowed one to create objects, speed up construction, and improve the quality of materials. That was the lot of craftsmen, artisans, and village craftsmen. Certainly not an aristocrat. The diagnostic mage looked at the reagent. He looked again. He raised his gaze to the count. The count looked on expectantly. "Production magic," said the diagnostician. "Class undetermined. This is rare." Silence. The count looked at his son. Veal looked back. He already understood everything. The decision was made a week later. The count announced it in the small hall. "You are not the heir and never will be," he said without hatred. "Just as a fact. Production magic has no place in the Montvain family. You will receive a small estate on the eastern outskirts. You will retain the family name." "That is all?" Veal asked. "What kind of estate?" His father grimaced slightly. "There's a village. A very small one. Technically nameless. No one bothered to register it properly. People call it Yahello. There are about 60 residents and a small castle. Conditions? None. Live as you see fit. As long as you don't disgrace the king, I'm satisfied." Veal nodded. "All right." His father had expected a different reaction. Tears. Rage. Pleading. "Are you satisfied?" he asked suspiciously. "No. But I accept it," Veal replied. "Those are 2 different things." Yahello came into view from the pass. Veal watched in silence. A small valley, sheltered on 3 sides by hills. A narrow but lively river. A dense forest stretching northward. A village of 60 houses, some of which were clearly empty. A wooden castle with a collapsed roof on the right wing. There had once been a palisade. Now it resembled more a sparse fence of uneven poles. 2 men had come with him. The first was Biz, a former servant of the castle, whom the count had sent along with his son out of pity or calculation. Short, balding, with such energetic movements as if he were constantly running late. The second was Rihanna, the castle doctor's daughter, 8 years old, who had asked to come along herself and whom, for some reason, they had let go. Veal looked at the village. Biz. What do you see? Poverty, young master. Me too. So there's room to grow. Biz looked at him with a mixture of horror and admiration. Rihanna simply nodded. Then let's get started, she said. She was 8, but she spoke as if she had come to run the village. Veal decided not to argue. Production magic worked differently than other types. Most mages cast spells like explosion, shield, or healing. The result is instantaneous, then the magic runs out. Production magic accumulated. Veal discovered this by accident at the age of 6, when he picked up a broken lock and realized what needed to be done. Not visually, but structurally. Every element became clear, as if a master with 30 years of experience were sitting inside him. He clenched the lock in his hand and focused his concentration on it. The lock clicked, and it was new. Not just like new, but better than new. More precise, smoother, stronger. The diagnostician later said, "Undetermined class." Veal understood why. Because it didn't fit the standards. Ordinary manufacturing magic created slowly, with effort, 1 item per hour. For him, it happened almost instantly, and he could simultaneously understand the structure of any material at hand. With wood, he could feel its fibers and compact them. With stone, he saw the cracks and could direct the crystal lattice. With metal, he sensed the impurities and could remove them. In engineering terms, this meant he could build better than any master craftsman, without expensive tools, without lengthy calculations, just his hands and magic, plus the knowledge of his past life. That was a lot. The residents of Ash Hill greeted their new master without enthusiasm and without hostility, just with weariness. There were 57 of them, mostly farmers, a few hunters, 1 former soldier, Krun, one-armed, with a face that gave nothing away. Veal was 8 years old. That was a problem. Krun approached first. "Are you our new lord?" "Yes." "You're 8 years old." "That's right. And what can you do?" Veal looked at the palisade. "See those poles?" "Yes." "Wait." He walked over to the nearest pole and placed his hand on it. He felt the wood, damp, loose, with rot at the base. He released his magic. The pole darkened, hardened, and shrank, becoming as solid as seasoned wood. The rot was gone. The grain smoothed out. Krun watched. "What is that?" "Crafting magic. They say it's useless." "Those who say that don't know how to use it," Veal replied. Krun looked at him for a long time. "All right," he said finally. "What do we need to do?" For the first week, Veal didn't build anything new. He watched and repaired all 68 palisade posts. The wood had become stronger than charcoal. The roof of the castle's right wing had caved in due to rotten rafters. Veal went inside and touched every beam. He couldn't save some. The structure was lost. He reinforced others. Then he went to the residential houses. The first house was a family with 3 children. The walls were leaking. The foundation had settled. "May I?" Veal asked the young woman who lived there, her eyes weary. She nodded, not quite understanding what was happening. Veal touched the foundation stone. He sensed it, soft limestone with water-filled cavities. It could be compacted. He released his magic slowly, like water through a cloth. The stone darkened. The cracks closed. The cavities sealed up. The woman watched. "What was that?" "Repairs," Veal replied. "Are you a wizard?" "A production mage." "They say." "I know what they say," Veal interrupted. "They're wrong." Biz turned out to be indispensable, not because he could do anything special, but because he knew how to talk to people so they didn't feel threatened. Within a week, he knew everyone by name. He knew who was in debt, who was sick, who was in a quarrel with a neighbor. He knew where the hidden grain stash was and why they were hiding it. The tax collector from the capital came 3 times a year, Biz reported that evening. "When is the next one?" "In 2 months. We have to be ready." Rihanna, sitting next to a notebook and a piece of charcoal, wrote it down. "I'll make a list of what we have," she said matter-of-factly. Veal looked at her. "You're 8 years old. So are you." "I'm a reborn adult. And I'm just smart," Rihanna replied without embarrassment. Veal was silent. "All right. Go ahead." In the 3rd week, Veal began to think about water. There was one well in the village, in the center. In the summer it ran dry. In the winter it sometimes froze over. People spent time getting water every day. The solution came from his past life, a water supply system. A simple gravity-fed system, nothing complicated. Take water from the river upstream, run a pipe downhill to the village. The problem with pipes. Wooden ones leak. There are no metal ones. Veal thought for a moment. Pottery pipes. He explained the idea to an old potter named OL. A pipe made of clay, said Veal. Cylindrical, 3 palms in diameter. The wall is 2 fingers thick. The end has a conical flare, so the next pipe fits over it. OL looked at him. I made pots, not pipes. It's the same principle, just a different shape. Firing. It needs to be even and hot. Otherwise, the pipe will crack from the water. OL scratched his beard. I'll try. I'll help with the firing. How? Veal placed his hand on the wall of the pottery kiln. He felt the bricks were uneven, with cold spots. He released his magic. The brick warmed evenly, from the center to the edges. OL looked at the kiln. The temperature has become different. Even, Veal confirmed. Try firing it now. The first pipes came out defective. The second ones were better. The third ones were good. Building the water supply took 3 weeks. When water began to flow from the gutter of the first house, the village women stopped and watched in silence. Then the mistress of the first house, the very one with the foundation, cupped her hands to catch the water and said quietly, "Thank you." Veal nodded. This is only the beginning. The end of the first month brought bad news. A messenger, dusty and clearly having ridden all night, arrived from a neighboring settlement. A goblin raid, he told Krun. 3 villages have already been burned. They're heading east. Krun reported to Veal. Veal asked, how many are there? They say a large pack. 100, maybe more. Distance? 2 days' journey. Veal nodded and began to think. The village had no defenses. Only 1 soldier, and he was crippled. Their weapons were hunting bows. The walls were laughable. Option 1, evacuation. No. Where to? Option 2, ask for help. From whom? Count Montvane won't send troops for the sake of a nameless village. Option 3, build fortifications. In 2 days. All right, Veal said aloud. Krun looked at him. Okay. In 2 days, we'll fortify the village so the goblins can't get through. Krun was silent for a long time. Are you serious? Yes. How? Magic. People. Proper construction. Krun lowered his gaze to his single hand. Tell me what to do. Veal didn't build stone walls right away. That would take a week even with magic. He used something else. An earthen rampart. A defensive technique known since ancient times. Pile up a wide rampart of earth, tamp it down, and reinforce it with wooden logs on the outside. An arrow pierces wood, but earth doesn't. Plus a moat in front of the rampart. Dig shallow but wide. Goblins are small. They can't jump over a moat. Veal explained it in 5 minutes. Then he divided the people. Men to dig the moat and carry the earth. The women would haul it in wheelbarrows and tamp it down. OL and the apprentices would chop logs. I needed sections 3 meters long. The children? Rihanna asked. The children carry water and make sure no one faints. I'll keep track of the progress, she said. Go ahead. The work went on all day and all night by torchlight. Veal didn't stop. He touched every stake driven into the ground with his hand and compacted the wood with magic. He walked the length of the earthen rampart, pressing his palms into the ground, and the soil compressed and hardened as if it had been tamped down over a year, not an hour. Krun stood nearby and watched. By dawn of the second day, the rampart was ready. 3 meters high, a moat 2 meters wide and 1.5 meters deep. A wooden palisade on the crest of the rampart, reinforced with magic. Krun walked around the fortification. This is better than some real forts, he said. A frontal attack is pointless, Veal confirmed. But let them try. The goblins arrived at sunset on the second day. Veal saw them from the castle's observation post in a small tower, which he had magically reinforced overnight to the hardness of stone. The pack was large, about 80 of them. Small, fast, with wooden spears and blunt, curved knives. When they saw the walls, they stopped. Apparently, they hadn't expected them. Shoot when they climbed the rampart, Veal said quietly to the hunters on the crest. Krun nodded. The goblins shuffled about, shouted something to each other, and began to climb. The moat stopped the first wave. Many fell, got tangled up, and got in each other's way. The hunters fired their arrows with precision. The second wave tried to crawl under the palisade from below. It didn't work. The ground was too hard. The third wave tried to throw ropes and climb over. Krun and 2 men met them on the ridge. Veal didn't stand aside. He had no weapon, but he had his hands. When one goblin rolled over the ridge and tumbled down, right toward Veal's feet, he bent down. He touched the ground next to the goblin. He released his magic. The ground around the goblin instantly compressed and rose a short distance, just high enough to trap his legs. The goblin screamed. Krun stepped forward and struck him briefly. "Can you make traps just like that?" he asked. Slowly, Veal replied. "But I can." "Do it." Veal did. 2 hours later, the goblins retreated, having lost a third of their pack. The village's losses: 2 wounded, not a single dead. Krun stood on the rampart and watched the departing pack. "You're an 8-year-old child," he said. "That's inconvenient," agreed Veal. "Not for me." He raised his only arm in a restrained salute. Veal nodded. By the winter of the first year, Ashhill had changed. Not beyond recognition, but enough. The earthen rampart around the village had been reinforced, with drainage ditches to prevent the rain from washing it away. The water supply was working, with 3 intake points. The castle's roof had been repaired, the third wing rebuilt, and the wooden cladding magically reinforced to the hardness of stone. The population hadn't changed in number, but the mood had changed. Biz reported one day, "Young master, 2 men from the neighboring village are asking if they can live here." "Why?" "They say it's safe here." Veal thought for a second. "If they know how to work, let them come. Their village is poor. We aren't rich either, but we have walls." "Then tell them, there's work and there are walls." "Is that enough?" Biz smiled. "For some people, that's all they need." By the spring of the second year, the population had grown to 95 people. Families had come from 3 neighboring villages. Among them, Dora, a young woman with 2 brothers. All 3 knew how to make bricks. Farn, a former army carpenter with 30 years of experience and just as many opinions on every subject. Mila and Zav, a young couple, both blacksmiths, which was a rarity. Veal greeted each one. "What can you do?" he asked. "Bricks," Dora said. "Good. Let's start replacing the earthen sections of the wall with stone." Farn arrived with a prepared speech on how to build. Veal listened. "That's all correct," he said. Farn was expecting an argument. "Besides this," added Veal, pointing to a specific section. Farn looked at it. He frowned. "You're right. Do you agree?" "I say what I think," Farn replied with dignity. "And right now, I think you're right." Mila and Zav looked at the castle smithy. "There's no proper forge here," Mila said. "We'll build one," Veal replied. "When?" "Today." Zav raised his eyebrows. "Today?" "More or less." Veal had a better grasp of his magic by the middle of his second year. It had several modes. First, understanding. He touched the material and sensed its structure. Wood, fibers, moisture, rotten spots. Stone, cracks, density. Metal, impurities, melting point, stress zones. Second, improvement. He infused magic, and the material became better. Wood hardened like bone. Stone became monolithic. Metal was purified of impurities. Third, creation. The most resource-intensive. He could shape material without tools, mold stone like clay, pull metal into the desired form. The combination of the third mode with the knowledge of his past life produced something incredible. He built a stone furnace in 4 hours. Not just a furnace of optimal design. The correct draft angle, the right shape of the firebox for even heating, fire clay in the lining, which he compacted magically. Mila tested it with the first firing. "The temperature is better than in the Royal Armory," she said. "You've been to the Royal Armory?" Veal asked in surprise. "We were kicked out of there." "Why?" "My husband argued with the master blacksmith about the shape of a sword, and he turned out to be right." Veal looked at Zava. "I like people who are right." By the middle of the second year, Veal began the main work. The wooden castle was becoming a stone one. Not right away. Not all of it. He started with the tower. A tower isn't just a symbol. It's an observation post, a firing position, the last line of defense. He designed it based on the principle of medieval battle towers from his past life. An octagonal base to disperse the impact force of battering rams, narrowing toward the middle to save material, widening toward the top, machicolations, and hanging loopholes through which defenders drop stones or pour hot liquid on the attackers. He quarried the stone himself, walking to the outcrop half a mile from the village, touching the rock and sensing where the best building blocks were. He chipped them away with magic and shaped them. Farn watched him do it. "Do you need stonemasons?" "No." "Do you need anyone?" "You need to supervise the laying." "I shape the blocks quickly, but I don't have an eye for levelness." "I can do that." "Then let's get to work." They worked well together. Vil didn't tell Farn what to do. He just worked alongside him. Farn didn't stay silent. He reasoned aloud, made observations, offered suggestions. Without expecting to be listened to, Veal always listened. By the end of the second year, Rihanna had become indispensable in a different way. She kept track of everything. Everything. How much grain had been harvested? How many stones had been laid? How many people had come? How many had left? How much firewood was needed for the winter? Veal noticed that she did this better than he did. Not because she was smarter, because she had no other thoughts to distract her from counting. The grain will last until February, she reported one evening. And after that, we'll need to buy more, or grow more. Growing more means expanding the fields. Yes, or improve the harvest. How? Rihanna paused. You're a production mage. Can you improve the soil? Veal looked at her. I haven't checked. Then check. This was said by an 8-year-old girl to a man with 40 years of experience from a past life. And he went to check. It turned out he could. He touched the earth and sensed its composition. The poor soil was sandy, lacking in nutrients. He couldn't add what wasn't there. But he could change the structure, compact it where needed, loosen it where the earth had become compacted. The harvest the following year increased by 1/3. That was enough. At the end of the second year, a tax collector arrived from the capital. A man named Venz, round-faced, with hard eyes, accustomed to poor villages and easy victories. He rode through the gate, looked at the stone tower, the fortified walls, the paved square. He stopped. Is this Yahello? That's the one, Biz replied. There was supposed to be a small village here. Wooden. Ragtag. We worked, Biz said with dignity. Venz walked through the village, taking notes. He found Veal near the second residential quarter under construction. Mr. Montwine? Yes. How old are you? 9. Venz looked at him for a long time. The tax assessment will be revised. You're producing more than what's stated in the old registry. Fair enough, replied Veal. So the tax will go up. I know. I'll come to the capital to contest part of the assessment. In a month. Venz stopped. You're coming to the capital? I have the right to appeal. You're 9 years old. It's inconvenient for me, but that doesn't take away my rights. Venz looked at him with the expression of a man who had encountered something that didn't fit into his charts. We'll see when you get here, he said finally. At the beginning of the third year, the village got a name. Not officially. That would come later with the paperwork. People just started saying it. First, Lord's Hill, then Stone Hill, then someone, no one remembers who, simply said, Kyver. In the old Alver dialect, that word meant a place where they hold. The walls hold. The people hold. They hold against trouble. It stuck. Veal heard it from Rihanna. People call us Kyver, she said. I know. Do you like it? I accept it. That's not an answer. Veal was silent. It's a good name. In the spring of the third year, another threat arrived. Not goblins. Orcs. This was more serious. Orcs aren't a scattered horde. They had leaders, tactics, and they knew how to use battering rams. A messenger brought the news. 50 orcs, led by a shaman. Krun reported. The previous wall won't stop them, he said bluntly. I know, Veal replied. What do we do? We build a new one. How long will it take? A week. Krun looked at him. That's impossible. For an ordinary builder, yes. Veal got to work immediately. A new type of wall, fortified stone masonry with buttresses. A buttress is a protruding transverse element that absorbs horizontal loads and transfers them to the foundation. When a battering ram strikes a wall without buttresses, all the force goes into destruction. With buttresses, it is dispersed. Veal shaped the stone blocks with magic from morning till night. Farn laid them. Mila and Zav forged metal fasteners for the gates. Viz organized the porters. Rihanna kept track of the stone, literally making sure that blocks of the right size went to the right places. On the 6th day, a 5-meter-high wall with 4 buttresses stood along the western facade. On the 7th, a defensive wall with Merlin-shaped battlements, behind which archers take cover and shoot through the embrasures. The orcs arrived on the 8th. The orc shaman was serious. His magic was destructive. He hurled fireballs from a distance of 200 meters. 2 hit the wall. The stone held. The wooden structures behind the wall began to burn. I need to go out, said Veal. Why? Shouted Krun from the crest. He's hitting the wood. If I reinforce everything with magic right now, it'll take time. If I go out and lure him out of the attack zone, it'll be faster. You're going after the shaman on foot? Not on foot. Veal touched the gate. Beyond the gate, He touched the ground, the trampled earth of the road, and felt the layer beneath it. Even. Solid. Enough. He released magic forward, not at a single point, but in a strip along the road in front of the gate. The ground rose and rose, not very high, knee-high, uneven, like waves. The orcs marching toward the gate stumbled. Their formation broke. The shaman bellowed something and raised his hands. A fireball flew toward Veal. Veal leaped back and simultaneously struck the ground with his palm. The magic hurled a stone in front of him, forming a shield as tall as a man. The fire crashed into it. For the first time, the shaman looked on in confusion. Veal wasn't advancing. He was simply creating obstacles. Earthen trenches, stone ledges, strips of hard ground where the orcs fell. This wasn't a battle. It was architecture. Krun and the archers on the wall did the rest. After the battle, Krun found Veal by the eastern facade. He was sitting on a rock, staring at the ground. "Tired," said Krun. Not a question, a statement. "My magic is running out," Veal replied quietly. "I don't know how to control it yet. You're a 9-year-old kid who just stopped the orcs. 8 until last winter." Krun sat down beside him. "Can I ask you something?" "Yes." "Do you know how to fight?" "No." "You know how to build?" "Yes." "And you think as if you've fought before?" "I know how it was done in other places," Veal replied cautiously. "Books?" "Books and memory." Krun nodded. He didn't ask the next question. Smart soldiers know. Some answers are better left unasked. "I'll be with you," he said simply. Veal looked up. "Why?" "Because you don't lie, and you don't give up." Pause. "That's enough." By the end of the 3rd year, Kyver was a different place. Population, 147. A stone wall on the west and north facades. Wooden on the rest, but magically reinforced, stronger than any stone. The castle has been completely rebuilt. An 18-meter-high tower, with a signal fire at the top. The smithy operates around the clock in 2 shifts. The fields yield a harvest a third greater than before. The first merchants have arrived, coming on their own. Veal wrote in the journal, Year 3. December. Kyver is alive. It's not a village anymore. It's not just a fortress yet. It's something in between and growing. Rihanna calculated. At the current rate, in 5 years there will be 300 of us. I think more. Krun says we need a garrison. Mila says we need a second horn. Farn says we need a proper stone bridge. They're all right. Let's start with the bridge. He closed the journal. Rihanna peeked through the door. Time for bed. I know. You're reading the blueprints again. Thinking about the bridge. It can wait until morning. Veal looked at her. You're 9 years old. So are you. You're sending me to bed. Yes. This is my estate. Yes. And if the master isn't sleeping, the master builds poorly. Pause. Logical, said Veal. He closed the blueprints. In the 4th year, it wasn't merchants who arrived. It was adventurers. First, a middle-aged man named Ket, with a sword on his back and a look on his face as if he'd gotten lost and didn't want to admit it. I heard they pay for work here, he said at the gate. Depends on the work, Veal replied. Security. Patrol. Can you do it? 20 years. Veal looked at him. Is Ket a name or a nickname? A name. Where did you hear about Kyver? A merchant mentioned it. He said some strange lord is building something big there and pays well. The merchant didn't lie about either part. Then I'm in, said Ket. I haven't hired you yet. But you will. Veal paused. Wait by the gate. For long? Until I decide. Ket shrugged and sat down on a rock by the gate. Krun watched the conversation and said quietly to Veal, he knows how to handle a sword. Look at his hands. I saw, Veal replied. And, we'll take him. Following Ket, 18 more adventurers arrived over the next 2 months. Kyver was becoming famous. In the middle of the 4th year, a letter arrived from his father. Count Nordis Montwine wrote briefly and to the point. I've heard about your activities. They say Ash Hill is now a fortified city. They say you've repelled 3 raids. They say merchants are traveling there. I sent you there thinking that production magic was useless. Perhaps I was mistaken about the extent of its application. Don't expect an apology. That's not the Montwine tradition. Your brother Nordos wants to come and see for himself. I haven't forbidden it. Nordis Montvane. Asterisk Veal read the letter twice. Rihanna sat beside him. What's in it? Father wrote. Is it bad news? No. Veal folded the letter. It's honest. Is that good? It's rare for him. Biz brought tea. He looked at Veal's expression. Is the young master upset? No, he replied. Just thinking. About what? About the fact that if my brother comes, We'll have to finish building the southern barracks before he arrives. Biz raised his eyebrows. Is that a reaction to the letter from your father? Brothers come in all shapes and sizes. It's better to have strong walls when you meet someone you haven't seen in a long time. Biz looked at him with that particular expression that meant, I work for a very strange man. But he began building the barracks the very next morning. Mila came to Veal one evening with a blueprint. I've been thinking about a new type of steel, she said. Veal looked at the drawing. Laminated welding. Several strips of metal with different carbon contents, forged together repeatedly. Each layer has a different hardness. The hard outer layer holds the edge. The soft inner layer absorbs the impact. It was Damascus steel from a past life. And she'd come up with it herself, without knowing the term, just through a blacksmith's intuition. Veal stared silently at the diagram. Have you tested it? 3 times. It turns out unstable. The layers separate during the final forging. The temperature drops too much between strikes. I know, but if I heat it faster, the surface burns. If I use my forge with its magically even heating. Mila looked at him. Will it work? It should. Then we'll try it tomorrow. It was the best conversation about metallurgy that Veal had had in his entire new life. The next day, the first blade made of laminated steel emerged with a wavy pattern, barely noticeable, like water in the wind. Mila held it in silence. Beautiful, she said at last. Strong, replied Veal. That doesn't exclude beauty. No, he agreed. It doesn't. In the spring of the 5th year, an official decree arrived. Not from his father. From the capital, with the royal seal. It was read aloud by the royal herald, who had come to Kyver specifically for this purpose. The content was brief. His Majesty King Elvera, having considered reports of Lord Veal Muntwine's activities in the lands of Ash Hill, and taking into account the threefold repulsion of armed raids, the growth of the population, and tax revenues, hereby recognizes the settlement of Kyver as a third-rank city. Lord Montvane is to appear at court within 3 months. Biz read the decree. He looked at Veal. You're 11 years old. I know. Are you going to the king? Yes. It's dangerous. Maybe. They might use you. They might. And you're going anyway? Veal looked at the walls. At the tower. At the cobblestone square. At the houses with tiled roofs. At Rihanna, who stood off to the side with a notebook, pretending not to listen. Kyver is on the map now, he said. So we need to make sure he's on it correctly. What does that mean? It means going and talking. While we're building, they don't notice us. Now they have. We can't stay silent anymore. Biz nodded. Veal traveled to the capital not as an outcast, but as a man who now had to be reckoned with. That changed everything. Biz, Krun, Rihanna, and Ket went with him. Rihanna insisted on accompanying him as a person of note, and Ket declared that until he received a new contract, he was going with them anyway. Veal didn't argue. The journey took 9 days. The closer they got to the capital, the more people's attitudes toward them changed. Along the road, people had already heard of Kyver, the fortress on the hill that had repelled raids, strengthened the lands, and provided work for blacksmiths, carpenters, and masons. Not everyone believed it, but many were already asking for directions. How many people are in the city now? Asked a merchant on the 6th day. Rihanna answered before Veal, 218. If you count the visiting craftsmen, almost 250. The merchant stared at her. Did you count them? Yes. She's 11, Ket added. The merchant looked at Veal with renewed interest. And you? I feel uncomfortable too, Veal said calmly. The courtyard greeted them with coldness. Not climatic. Political. Gray halls, stern faces, expensive fabrics, cautious glances. Here, they did not look kindly on success that came too quickly, unless it was through family connections. King Arterin III, tall, thin, with weary eyes, received Veal in a small hall, without unnecessary ceremony. That in itself was a sign of respect. Lord Montvane, said the king, you are 11 years old, and you have made half the southern region talk about you. That wasn't part of the plan, your majesty. And what was? To save the village. The king smiled slightly. They say you turned it into a fortress. They are correct. They also say you used production magic in a way no one has ever used it before. That is also true. The king leaned back in his chair. Explain to me why an aristocrat who was sent to the backwoods as useless returns with a town, a fortress, and taxes 3 times higher than before? Veal took his time answering. Because he knew, the wrong answer here is more costly than a battle. Because the land doesn't disappear just because it's ignored, he said at last. It's simply waiting for someone who knows how to work. The king looked at him for a long time. That's not a nobleman's answer. Perhaps, but it's the correct answer. There were two people present at the council whom Veal immediately disliked. The first was Duke Laven, an influential landowner whose estates were located near Kyver. The second was Chancellor Amber, a dry-witted financier who clearly believed in nothing but numbers. Laven smiled too gently. Of course, we are pleased with the young lord's successes, he said. But should a private initiative be turned into a state precedent? Why not? Asked Veal. Because such projects require enormous resources. No, Veal objected calmly. They require order, knowledge, and control. Chancellor Amber looked up from his papers. And money, agreed Veal. But money comes back if it's invested in infrastructure. Laven grimaced. You speak as if you had skilled craftsmen, materials, and a willing population at your disposal. We didn't. Then how? Veal looked him straight in the eye. I started by improving what was already there. A pause hung in the room. The king tapped his fingers on the armrest. Describe the methods. And Veal described them. Not romantic. Not heroic. Practical. An earthen rampart as a temporary defense. Stone masonry with buttresses. Pottery pipes for the water supply. Magically standardized heat treatment of bricks and kilns. Standardization of timber and metal dimensions. Separation of supply chains. Accounting for labor and resources. Training locals rather than bringing in outside craftsmen. Ember wrote it all down. Laven listened, growing increasingly somber. When Veal finished, the king said, Do you realize that this undermines the old system of dependence on the great houses? I do. And you did it anyway? Yes. Why? Veal paused. Because the old system kept people poor. And poverty is not a tradition. It is a failure of governance. That was harsh. That is precisely why it worked. After the council meeting, Laven tried to act quickly. First, rumors. Then, an accusation of abuse of power. Then, an attempt to challenge Kyver's right to independent tax administration. In short, he wanted the fortress city to remain under external control. Veal didn't respond loudly. He brought a stack of documents to the chancellery. A report on population growth, tax statements, data on trade routes, lists of artisans who had moved to Kyver, a breakdown of defense expenditures before and after the fortifications. And on top of it all, a letter from the local military commander, which read, Without Kyver, we would have had to block the southern route twice last year. Amber read in silence. Then he looked up. Is all this yours? Most of it, yes. Did you collect the statistics yourself? Yes. At 11 years old? I don't like it either, Veal replied dryly. Even Amber smiled. 3 days later, the king signed a new decree. Kyver was granted expanded rights to internal governance, the right to recruit its own guards, and the right to collect a portion of trade duties directly. Laven had lost, but he didn't leave. That meant he would try again. Veal understood that. They were returning to Kyver not as if coming home, but as if returning from the capital to a place that now demanded attention. On the way, Rihanna didn't let go of the stack of papers. What are you writing? Ket asked. A new structure for city administration. You're just a kid. That's why I haven't gotten into the habit of doing bad things yet, she replied. Ket chuckled. Krun, riding alongside, said to Veal, Now they'll definitely try to corner you. Yes. Are you ready? Veal looked ahead. At the highway, at the fields, at the distant line of hills, where the tower of Kyver was already visible. No, he said honestly. But we have walls. And people, added Krun. And people, agreed Veal. By this time, Kyver was no longer just a fortress. It had become a system. Veal had built it so that each element supported the next. The walls protect the population. The population ensures production. Production generates income. Income pays for the guard and expansion. Training creates new specialists. Specialists keep improving everything further. It was a closed cycle of growth. That is precisely why Kyver could develop faster than its neighbors. Not by magic alone, but by structure. When Veal returned, a new signal bell was already hanging on the western tower. Mila was working on the second smithy. Farn had begun building a stone bridge across the small river by the southern road. Rihanna was teaching a class of 37 children. Biz had organized the city registry. Ket and 3 other former adventurers were patrolling the outskirts. and none of this depended on a single person anymore. That was the most important thing. A month after his return, a letter arrived from Count Nordis. This time he asked him to come in person. Vil went with Rihanna and Biz. Krun stayed in Kyver to keep an eye on the garrison. Father greeted him without coldness, which was almost a shock. "You've done more than I expected," the Count said when they were alone. "You sent me to a place where, in your opinion, I was supposed to disappear." "Yes. And you still don't know how to treat me." Father looked at him for a long moment. "True." Vil waited. "You are no longer useless," the Count said at last. "But you have become a threat to the established order. An order that fears usefulness is a bad order." The Count smiled. "You speak like a man who can no longer be merely a son. I never was one." "Silence. What do you want?" asked the father. Vil replied immediately, "Official recognition of Kyver as a fortress city. Immunity for internal reforms. The right to train new masters without interference from vassals." The Count nodded. "Is that all?" "That is enough for now." The father looked at him for a long time. Then he said, "I thought you would become a disgrace to the family." Vil did not look away. "And now?" "Now I think you may be the only one of us who understands that a family is not about blood. It is what will remain after you are gone." It was not an apology, but to the Count, it was almost one. By the end of the 5th year, Kyver had become something no one had expected of him. A fortress, a city, a training center, a stronghold for the entire region. And, most importantly, proof that production magic, once considered secondary, can change the world when wielded by a man with the mind of an engineer and the stubbornness of an aristocrat. Vil wrote in his journal, the 5th year. Kyver, population 263. Official status, 3rd rank fortress city. Wall 87% complete. Water supply expanded. Bridge under construction. School, 54 students. Blacksmiths, 5. Bricklayers, 7. Carpenters, 11. Guards, 22. Today the king confirmed the rights to internal governance. Levin didn't finish. But now this is no longer his land. If I've learned anything, it's that it's not a miracle that turns a village into a city. It's a system, and people who were given a chance. And, perhaps, a little stubbornness. He set down his pen. Evening light streamed through the tower window. Below, children were walking home from school. Workers were laying stone in the square. A hammer rang out from the smithy. And this was not the end of the story. It was the moment when everything was just beginning to truly come to life. Levin will return. Kyver will continue to grow. Rihanna will become not just a tax collector, but the person who builds the city's first chancellery. Ket will organize a permanent security force. Mila will create new alloys. Biz will write the city's first charter. The most dangerous time for any victor is not war. It is the silence that follows. As long as the walls stand, the treasury grows, and people smile in the streets. It seems that everything has already been decided. But that is precisely when those who could not stop you before begin to make their move. They do not rush to storm the city. They write letters. They bribe officials. They use the word tradition when what they really mean is our benefit. Vil realized this 6 months after returning from the capital. Kyver had been officially recognized as a fortified city. The garrison was growing. The school was operating. The bridge across the southern river already connected the highway to the market square. The mills and forges were generating income. And that was when the problems began. A letter arrived bearing the royal chancellor's seal. Brief, cold, almost polite. In connection with the revision of regional tax rates and the allocation of defense expenditures, Kyver is ordered to increase its contributions to the central treasury by 18%. Rihanna read the letter first. Have they lost their minds? No, said Vil. They believe we can no longer refuse. Biz looked at the numbers. This will kill the expansion. Yes. And what are you going to do? Vil was silent for a long time. What I always do. That's not an answer. I'll find out exactly who pushed this through. And within 2 days, he found out. Duke Levin. Levin couldn't directly prevent Kyver from growing, but he could make things worse. He started applying pressure through the roads, through the merchant guilds, through access to the stone rubble and timber that passed through his lands. He raised the price of transportation, then the toll for crossing the bridge, then inspections at the border of his estates, which held up shipments for 3 days. It was petty, and that's exactly why it was dangerous. Mila brought the calculations that evening. If this continues, We won't be able to expand the forges this winter. How much are we losing? 12% on materials, 16% on time. So they're hitting us where it hurts, said Veal. What did you think? Asked Rihanna. That they'd storm the walls? No, he replied. But I hoped they'd at least try to play fair. Ket smirked. Fair? The nobles? That was naive, Veal admitted. Unforgivably naive, Biz added. Veal gathered everyone in the evening. Krun, Mila, Rihanna, Biz, Ket, Farn, OL, and now 2 new additions. A former guild clerk and a young engineer's apprentice from the capital named Sev. They're cutting off our supplies, said Veal. So we'll stop depending on them. Sev raised his eyebrows. Completely? At least for the basic materials. What does that mean? A quarry, a sawmill, a brick factory, and our own river crossing. Farn snorted. I'll handle the quarry. The sawmill too. But a river crossing during the rainy season? We'll build a raft with a guide system, Veal replied. Or a bridge, if we can figure it out. Rihanna was already taking notes. And our own coal depot. We already have one, said Ket. Not enough, replied Veal. We need a second one, away from the city. Why? So it doesn't burn down with the first one. Mila nodded knowingly. Smart. Veal looked at the map. And also, we need a railroad. Everyone fell silent. Ket was the first to ask, what? Not the one you're thinking of. Not right away. First, a rail car within the quarry and mine. A small track on cast iron rails. Then we'll expand it. Sev slowly raised his head. That's possible. I know. Have you done this before? No, Veal answered honestly. But the principle is simple. And that was enough. They built the sawmill on the northern slope, where a stream provided a constant flow. The principle was simple. A water wheel turns a shaft, and the shaft transmits the rotation through a gear train to a vertical saw. The log is fed along the guides. This wasn't Veal's invention. It was standard machinery, considered almost ancient in his former world. But here, it was a revolution. Farn watched the foundation. If the shaft shifts by half an inch, everything will warp. That's why it won't shift, Veal replied, touching the support. The magic of manufacturing had compacted the stone base as if it had been poured and cured over years. Mila looked at him approvingly. You're still too precise for a human, and you still complain too little for a blacksmith. She smiled. The sawmill produced its first log in 10 days. After 20 days, it was working twice as fast as manual sawing. A month later, Kyver stopped buying lumber from Laven at his price. And that was the beginning of a real war. When the economic route failed, Laven went through the church. Father Mock, a tall, thin preacher with a voice like a dry twig, arrived in Kyver. He preached about humility, about order, about how an excessive desire to improve the world can be a sign of pride. Rihanna listened from the front row and began to get angry after just 5 minutes. Biz whispered, She's going to stand up now? Let her stand up, Krun said quietly. And she stood up. If improving people's lives is pride, Rihanna said, then why did the church build stone walls instead of praying in the rain? Silence hung in the hall. Father Mock looked at her slowly. Child, you don't understand. I do, she interrupted. You're afraid of change because change renders unnecessary those who are used to being intermediaries between people and order. Veal closed his eyes. That was too accurate. Father Mock turned pale. Who taught you that language? The one who builds the city, Rihanna replied. The hall buzzed. The next morning, half the townspeople were already retelling her speech. Veal listened, silently poured himself some water, and said, Don't do that again. Why? Because now we have an enemy, and one from the pulpit too. He was already one, Rihanna replied. He's just stopped pretending now. Veal began building an iron track system to the quarry. It was too early for a full-fledged railroad, but a system of cast iron rails for a mine car, which would be pulled by horses or a winch. Advantages: less friction, greater load capacity, higher speed over short distances, less need for a large number of workers. Sev drew up a diagram. Mila helped with the metal plates. Farn laid the foundation. Ket guarded the work. Too many random strangers had started showing up at the construction site. Krun was the first to notice. They're watching us. Who? Asked Veal. Not locals. A day later, one of the observers turned out to be one of Laven's men. Veal didn't make a scene. He just walked over, looked, and said, Tell your duke. His land no longer holds us so tightly. The man turned pale. I didn't do anything, I know, but you'll tell him. And he left. Rihanna insisted on expanding the school. We need more than just children, she said. We need adults. Reading, arithmetic, bookkeeping, the basics of law. Why do adults need to learn? Biz asked. So they won't let themselves be cheated later. Veal agreed. The school was housed in a new stone building next to the office. Veal put together the curriculum himself. Mathematics, reading and writing, basics of weights and measures, descriptive geometry, principles of how mechanisms work, basic city law, hygiene. Rihanna added the last one herself. People need to know why they shouldn't pour slop into the well, she said. They know. No, she replied. They think they know. Veal looked at her with a certain amount of respect. You're dangerous. Thank you. By fall, Sev had finalized the design. An intracity rail cart. The idea was simple. A cart with iron wheels and side rails runs along a stone track laid in the ground. Over short distances, it is pulled by a single horse. Cargo is transported faster and with fewer losses. It wasn't just about savings. It was the beginning of a new era in logistics. The first cart was tested in the quarry. When it started moving along the tracks, Cat whistled. The horse pulls twice as much cargo. Exactly, said Veal. And is this already your favorite victory? No, he replied. This is only the first step. By the second week, the cart was already hauling stone from the quarry to the factory. By the third, coal. By the fourth, Kyver began to resemble not just a fortress, but an industrial hub. But the more Kyver grew, the more discontent grew. Not among the people, among the old houses. Because every new success of the city diminished the power of those who were accustomed to profiting from others' dependence. Levin wasn't just annoyed. He was gathering allies. Other lords began asking uncomfortable questions. Why had Kyver been granted special rights? Why doesn't he channel everything through the old trading houses? Why are peasants being taught to read and write in the city? Why are warehouses and workshops being built there without approval? The answer was simple. Because it worked. But simplicity doesn't always save the day. It was then that the game against Veal began to be played not in the local markets, but in the capital. Rihanna discovered the forgery. They brought her a copy of an old royal decree, according to which Kyver's rights to independent administration were supposedly restricted. The handwriting was almost correct. Almost. It's a forgery, she said, without even looking up. Look at the stroke in the word administration. The original was written with a different pen. Veal took the paper. He checked it and realized, yes, the forgery was cruder than it seemed. Who brought it? A courier with the Duke of Leven's seal. Directly? Yes. Good. Good. Rihanna stared at him. They're planting a fake decree on us. So they're in a hurry. That's no consolation. Should it be? Veal asked. She opened her mouth, then closed it. Then she said, no, but I still don't like it. Me neither. And that's when the most dangerous part began. Not the construction, but the proof. Veal went to the Royal Archives. He wasn't alone. Rihanna and Biz went with him, as well as Ket for protection. At the archives, he asked for the original decree. At first, they refused him. Then he produced a letter from the Chancellor. Then a letter from the King. Then statistical reports that couldn't be ignored. The archivist, gray-haired and gaunt, led them to the vault. The original was genuine. The copy was a forgery. This proved that someone in the region was drafting documents to strip Kyver of its autonomy. The archivist looked at Veal strangely. You're 11 years old, and you've made me verify seals as if at a military tribunal. I'm trying not to lose my rights. I see. Rihanna walked beside him and said quietly, now we have proof. Yes. And what next? Veal looked ahead. Next, we'll make it more costly for them to lie than to leave us alone. Upon returning, Veal convened a council. Krun, Mila, Farn, Biz, Rihanna, Sev, Ket. Levin is forging documents, cutting off supplies, and trying to undermine our right to govern, Veal said. So he's no longer operating economically. Now he's playing for conquest. And what do we do? Ket asked. We make Kyver so strong that it can't be taken without a war. Farn smirked. That's already our usual plan. No, Veal said. Back then, we were building a city. Now we're building a regional hub. Everyone fell silent. What do you mean? Rihanna asked. Veal unfolded the map. Roads, warehousing hubs, a second bridge, small settlements around Kyver, mills and workshops in the satellite villages. Not a single city, but a network. Sev nodded slowly. If we establish a uniform standard for track gauge and wagons. Yes. And a unified tax registry. Yes. And a distributed guard force. Yes. Biz looked at the map and, for the first time, smiled as broadly as he rarely did. Then they won't be able to crush us with a single push. Exactly, said Veal. By the end of the arch, Kyver was no longer just a city. It had become a frontier. A place where, for the first time, the old aristocratic order could not hold people back by force of habit. People went where there was work, schools, workshops, protection, and clear rules. And that was more terrifying than any army. Because when people choose a place for themselves, they can no longer simply be sent back. Veal stood on the tower of Kyver in the evening, watching the lights of the new workshops and hearing the first load of stone creak along the rail cart below. Rihanna climbed up to him with a stack of papers. We have a new term, she said. What is it? Not a village, not a fortress, not an ordinary city. And she held out a sheet of paper. A threshold city. Veal looked at the map, at the towers, at the workshops, at the bridge, and at the smoke. A threshold, a place of transition. He nodded slowly. It fits. The first 2 years after Kyver was recognized as a fortress city seemed almost peaceful to Veal. Almost. It was an illusion, like the smooth surface of water before a deep pit. The city grew, workshops multiplied, roads improved, and it seemed that everything was proceeding along a path that could simply be continued. But the larger Kyver became, the greater a threat it posed to those who lived by the old order. The old order was simple. The land belongs to the clan. The clan keeps people in line through dependence. Dependence turns into income, and income into power. If somewhere along this line a place appears where people can live, work, learn, and defend themselves without intermediaries, the whole structure begins to falter. Laven understood this before the others, and he did what people like him do when they lose their monopoly on the future. He started a war. Not a direct one yet. First a trade war, then a legal one, then an information war, and only after that, a real one. And the moment his first moves reached Kyver, Veal finally understood. This was no longer just a dispute over a village. It was a dispute over who had the right to build a new world at all. The first blow was aimed at coal. The coal seam that Kyver was mining through a system of tunnels turned out to be blocked by a formally legitimate safety inspection. An inspector arrived from the southern province, along with 3 clerks, 2 armed guards, and a long list of complaints. Your ventilation is inadequate, said the inspector, without taking off his hat. Sev, standing next to Veal, lowered his eyes to the papers. Strange, he said. There are 21 items on the report, and they're all written in the same handwriting. The inspector didn't even blink. It's a standard form. For whom? Veal asked. For all the mines in the province. And all the mines receive exactly this report after Laven raised the transportation rates. Sev asked almost matter-of-factly. The inspector tensed. Veal looked at him calmly. Do you realize that if we stop coal deliveries, the forges, brick kilns, furnaces, and part of the heating system will grind to a halt? That's not my problem, the inspector replied. Then you don't understand, said Veal. And he really didn't understand. Because 3 days earlier, Veal had already ordered the coal hub to be split into 2 independent routes. One went to the main furnaces, the second to the reserve warehouses outside the city. And part of the fuel went to the already prepared dry storage facilities at the new sawmill. The inspection delayed the process, but didn't stop it. Laven didn't like that. He sent a second wave. Veal began receiving letters. First from the guilds, which suddenly became concerned about product quality. Then from neighboring lords who were surprised to learn that Kyver was calculating duties on its own. Then from the chancellery, where for the first time in a long while they began asking for clarification on whether the city had overstepped its authority in the areas of education and military conscription. This was no mistake. This was a front. Rihanna, no longer a child in Kyver's eyes, but a junior city administrator with a terrible habit of speaking the truth quickly and aloud, laid all the letters out on the table. They can't attack directly, she said. That's why they're attacking the legality. Biz nodded. And what do they have on their hands? Formally, almost everything, she replied. They have the old system. It supports them. Veal ran his finger over one of the letters. Then we need our own legal framework. Sev looked up. What does that mean? Kyver's regulations. Not just we decided so, but the rules by which the city lives, counts, hires, trains, distributes, and builds. Silence. Then Mila said, "You want to create your own charter?" "Yes, but that's almost like—" She paused, searching for the right word. "Like a small state?" Veal asked calmly. No one answered, because that was exactly what everyone had thought. Work on the charter took 43 days. It wasn't just a document. It was a system. Rihanna wrote the wording, Biz checked its practical feasibility, Sev put together the technical sections, Mila and Ket checked how it would affect supplies and security, and Veal assembled everything into a single framework. The main provisions were as follows. The land of Kyver and the surrounding settlements is under the internal administration of the city council. The city has the right to independently hire and train artisans, engineers, teachers, and guards. Internal taxes are allocated primarily to infrastructure, defense, and education. The most important resources, stone, wood, metal, and water, are to be accounted for and distributed according to priority. City workshops must adhere to uniform standards of quality and safety. Any attempt at external interference in the supply system is to be immediately made public through the Royal Chancellery. Veal wrote the last point himself. Rihanna read it and looked up. That's risky. Yes. They'll be angry. Yes. Then why? Because paper is a weapon too. Laven's reply didn't come right away. He was too experienced to act on emotion. He let Kyver feel the pressure even more intensely. First, 2 metal suppliers disappeared. Then one of the forest cooperatives shut down because it couldn't renew its license. Then new tolls were imposed on the highway for vehicles carrying cargo exceeding a certain weight. Sev checked all this and laid the papers on the table. This is no longer a coincidence. No, said Veal. It's a system of strangulation. And how do we break it? Veal didn't answer right away. Because there are different ways to break it. We can strike back. You can go around it. You can raise the stakes so that it becomes unprofitable for the opponent to continue. We'll build our own route, he said finally. Through whose lands? Rihanna asked. Through no one's. There are no such lands. You're wrong. There are lands that everyone considers useless. Swamps. Wastelands. Old forest areas. You can build a road along them if you reinforce the ground. Farn snorted. You want to build a road through a useless place? Yes. Why? Because Laven isn't making money off it. And everyone understood. That was the beginning of the bypass corridor. The route ran through a lowland north of Laven's estates. The place was disgusting. Wet ground, bumps, rotting roots, mosquitoes, unstable soil. But it was precisely there that the land brought no income to anyone, which meant no one was keeping a close eye on it. First, they had to lay the foundation. Farn suggested a classic floating deck, thick oak poles laid across crossbeams, topped with a layer of gravel and compacted clay. Where the soil was particularly weak, they added fascines and woven willow mats to distribute the weight. Veal compacted the layers with magic, ensuring that the water wouldn't wash away the foundation. Sev made markings. If we maintain the slope, the cargo wagons will roll along with almost no loss of traction, he said. Almost. Rihanna asked. Almost. Almost doesn't cut it for me, she said. Me neither, Sev replied. But physics is rarely kind. Ket, surveying the marshy stretch, spat to the side. We're building a road where no one would even want to stop. Exactly, said Veal. Because no one will set up a toll booth here. For the new route to make sense, new wagons were needed. The old ones broke down too quickly. Narrow rims, high ground pressure, poor balance. Veal proposed wide wheels with metal rims and a reinforced axle. Sev calculated the center of gravity. Mila forged the hubs. Biz organized a test run carrying stone. The first trip took place at night. Not because they were hiding. Because they wanted to check if the road would attract too much attention. The wagon rolled over the deck without a hitch. The second trip carried coal. The third with bricks. And only after that did it become clear. It works. Laven found out about it a week later. He sent his man with a new proposal. He says the Duke is ready to lower the duties if Kyver signs an exclusive contract to supply building materials only through his warehouses. Veal laughed. It was a short, dry laugh, devoid of joy. An exclusive contract? For something we've already bypassed? Exactly, said Rihanna. He thinks we'll be scared. No, he thinks you'll get tired. Veal looked at her. He's wrong. A month later, settlements began to spring up around the new road. First, a single camp for the builders. Then a workshop for repairing wagons. Then a warehouse to supply the road. then a bread oven, because the workers had to eat, then permanent houses. Veal was the last to realize it. When he arrived to inspect the site, he saw not a camp, but the beginnings of a town. Several longhouses, a blacksmith shop, a storage shed, a vegetable garden, a well, a wooden chapel, a small clearing for market trading. Biz stood nearby and scratched the back of his head. This is already a settlement. Yeah. Does it even have a name? Not yet. Rihanna approached with some papers. People call it the threshold. Veal looked up. Why? Because this is where the path to Kyver begins. Not bad. And also because it's a place of transition. From dependence to independence. He looked at her. Did you come up with that yourself? No. The people did. And that was something entirely new. Now Kyver was no longer the sole center. It began to grow into a network. Laven realized that the road hadn't broken down. Then he decided to strike at the ore. On the northern hill, where Kyver planned to expand the new mine, an ancient claim of ownership suddenly emerged from one of Laven's distant vassals. The documents asserted that the land beneath the hill belonged to an ancient lineage, meaning that mining without consent was illegal. It was ridiculous and dangerous, because illegality could become a pretext for outside intervention. Vil didn't argue the documents right away. He led his men to the archives. They checked the ancient land registers. The land turned out to be in a gray area, a borderline entry that hadn't been finalized in the previous century. Then Veal did what Laven didn't expect. He offered a buyout. Not for the land, for the right to use it. We'll pay a one-time fee for 40 years of mining, he told the archivist in front of witnesses. The funds go into the general treasury and are recorded publicly. That's a huge sum, the archivist remarked. Yes. And you're sure? If we don't secure the rights now, we'll lose the mine for years. Laven was counting on the bureaucratic quagmire. Veal flooded him with money and publicity. This disarmed the predator for a time, but only for a time. The next blow was sabotage, a fire at the sawmill. Not a big one, but dangerous. The fire started near the dry lumber shed, where processed materials for new houses were stored. Kit sounded the alarm. People rushed to the scene with buckets. Veal arrived a few minutes later. He immediately realized this was no accident. The smell of oil, planting of tinder, footprints from boots not from Kyver. They want to slow us down, said Biz, looking at the charred floorboards. Not just that, replied Veal. They want us to be afraid to expand. Rihanna clenched the papers. So what now? Now we'll do what they don't expect. What exactly? Veal looked at the sawmill. We'll install a fire suppression system. The next morning, he personally designed a water tank on a raised platform, a supply system through wooden pipes, emergency dampers, and hand pumps at every major warehouse. A small system, but enough to suppress a local fire before it becomes a disaster. Mila looked at the blueprint skeptically. Will it work? It should. You say should more and more often. Because the world is more complicated than calculations. And you're building it anyway. Yes. They found one of the arsonists. Not by following a trail. By stupidity. The young man Ket had cornered by the road turned out not to be a mercenary, but a peasant boy from Laven's estates who'd been promised money and easy work. He was trembling and crying. Who hired you? Ket asked. The boy remained silent. Ket didn't hit him. He just said, you have two options. Either you talk, or they'll find you in a week, and then it won't be me asking the questions. The boy cried even harder. Name? Asked Veal, stepping closer. I don't know. A man in a cloak told me to go to the warehouse. What's the sign? The boy looked up. A black ribbon with silver. Rihanna frowned. That's not Laven. Veal realized it too. Laven was too cautious to leave his mark. That meant a deeper level. Someone was operating in his shadow, and that was even worse. Father Mock, that very same church preacher, had returned to Kyver as if of his own free will. Now he spoke more softly. Too softly. I have come to reconcile the city with the church, he said at the council meeting. Rihanna looked at him in a way that even Biz understood. This was going to be bad. Before, you came to teach us humility, she said. What has changed now? I have seen the fruits of your labor, child. Don't call me that. And I have come to understand that God can bless diligence. Veal looked at him without a smile. You want to bless success once it has already proven itself. I want peace. No, said Veal. You want to be needed again. The hall fell silent. Mock looked at him. Your words are dangerous. And you came here dangerously. Ket moved his hand almost imperceptibly toward his belt. We are not enemies of the church, Veal continued, but we will not allow it to hinder education and production under the guise of virtue. Mock lowered his eyes. That was the moment Veal realized. The church is also divided. Part of it supports the old hierarchy. Part of it is ready to join the new center of power if it is already strong enough. As always, people follow power first. Then they call it faith. In the spring, Veal opened a school for craftsmen. Not just a vocational school, a full-fledged one. With departments, stonework, woodworking, blacksmithing, calculation and design, municipal law, sanitation and water supply. Rihanna drew up the schedule. Biz organized student admissions. Mila took the blacksmithing department. Farn took construction. Sev took mechanics. Veal himself taught the course on material structure and systems design. And it was strange, because just a few years ago, he had been an outcast, a boy considered useless. Now he stood before 25 students and explained how the load is distributed in an arch, how water pressure works in a pipeline, and why you can't build a tower without a proper foundation. One of the students asked, "Sir, why are you doing all this yourself?" Veal replied after a pause, "Because if I don't explain it, everything will depend on a single person, and that means the city will be vulnerable again." Rihanna in the front row smiled. She had understood this long ago. At some point, Veal decided that Kyver needed access to the sea. Not direct access, but at least logistical access. Too much depended on the southern markets. If the new industrial belt was to function, a channel for shipping goods was needed. That's how the Southern Highway project came about. Not just a road, a system. Kyver, the threshold, the river junction, the southern warehouse, the port route. To build it, they had to negotiate with neighboring lands, reinforce bridges, lay embankments, and establish a single standard for wheel gauge. Sev nearly fainted with delight. A single track gauge? For all the wagons? Yes. Do you realize that this will change everything? That's exactly why I'm doing it. Rihanna had already drafted the approval proposal. Biz was preparing the map. Ket, folding his arms, said, "That means that soon we won't just have a city. We'll have a network of cities." Veal looked at the route on the map. "Yes, and then the old houses will go completely berserk." "Of course. And you?" Veal replied calmly, "And I wanted to be too late for them." The king summoned the Council of Lords. This was no longer a local issue. Too many regions were complaining. Kyver was taking people, poaching craftsmen, building new roads, and changing the distribution of goods. Laven stood up first. "Your Majesty," he said, "Lord Montvane has created an unmanageable economic hub on his land. He is poaching vassals, violating the old duties, and effectively forming an autonomous power structure." Veal sat across from him. Beside him were Rihanna as accounting advisor, Biz as registrar, Ket as head of security, and Sev as engineering representative. The king looked at Veal. "What do you say?" Veal stood up. "I say that the old duties kept people in poverty. I say that people go where there is work, education, and protection. I say that if the estates cannot keep people without coercion, the problem is not with the people." The hall buzzed. Laven leaned forward sharply. "Are you accusing the entire nobility?" "No," Veal replied calmly. "I maintain that it is obsolete where it prevents people from living. This is rebellion. No, it is a consequence." Silence. The king slowly raised his hand. Enough. And for the first time in a long while, he became not merely a listener, but a judge. The king proved to be wiser than many had expected. He did not pressure Kyver in Laven's favor, nor did he tear down the old system overnight. He did what strong rulers do when they sense that history is changing. He preserved the face of the old world, but made room for the new. Kyver was granted experimental status as a transitional administrative district. This meant the right to its own technical regulations, the right to establish educational institutions, the right to infrastructure planning without petty interference from the lords, the right to develop new roads and transit hubs, the right to manage a portion of local taxes, provided there was public accountability. Laven stormed out of the hall, white with rage. But there was nothing he could do, because now it was no longer a single duke's decision. It was the king's policy. Almost immediately after the council meeting, an attack took place. Not on Viel. On the warehouse containing the blueprints and school archives. If they had burned, the satellite cities would have lost their established standards. It would have been a catastrophe. Ket raised the alarm just in time. The fire was already spreading across the roof. When Veal arrived at the scene, he saw people with buckets, smoke, and a panicked crowd. And then he realized that the attackers hadn't just set the warehouse on fire. They had planted a magical heater inside, a primitive device made of enchanted coal that was supposed to ignite in an hour. Sev was the first to realize this. "It's unstable," he shouted. "If it heats up completely, everything will blow up." "How long until the explosion?" asked Veal. 10 minutes. Veal didn't hesitate. He walked to the back wall of the warehouse, touched the stone, and channeled his magic not into the material itself, but into the structure behind the wall. He was creating thermal insulation, layer by layer, to contain the heat. Mila and Ket were carrying out boxes. Rihanna was pulling out archive folders. Biz was yelling at people not to get in the way. And just as the magical heater finally started to overheat, Veal had already managed to direct the heat into a specially sealed area by the side wall, where it went into the ground. A dull thud, not an explosion, just a wisp of smoke and the crack of brick. The warehouse survived. Sev sat down right on the ground, pale. "That was too close." "Yes," said Veal, "but we already know how to work up close." Finally, the main issue became clear. There was more than one person behind Laven. There was a trade union of the old houses that didn't like the strengthening of the cities. There was a part of the church apparatus that feared the education of the population. And there was a man whom no one had seriously considered before, the Chancellor's advisor on the distribution of provincial subsidies, Art Neal. He was the one who forged the documents. He was the one who disrupted the shipments. He was the one who planted random inspections and delays. Not out of ideology, out of greed. Too many regional funds passed through his signature. Kyver and the new cities were rendering his scheme useless. Veal learned this from Rihanna. She came to him with a stack of documents and said, "Everything you were looking for, I have it." Veal looked up. "Who?" "Art Neal. He works through the public funds distribution system. Forges official documents, delays compensation, sabotages signatures." "Proof. I have it." "Good. Aren't you going to ask how I found it?" "I'll ask later. I just compared the delays by quarter and the handwriting on the copies." Veal looked at her with newfound respect. "You're not just crunching numbers anymore. I'm managing data now," she replied. And that was the truth. This time, Veal was traveling to the capital not as a supplicant, but as a prosecutor. Rihanna, Biz, and Sev went with him. Kat stayed in Kyver. Mila took over production control. They were already expected in the capital. The king received Veal without delay. Stacks of documents were laid out on the table. Chancellor Art Neal, Veal said, had systematically tampered with documents, delayed deliveries, and misallocated funds to weaken Kyver and maintain the province's dependence on the old houses. The king leafed through the papers in silence, longer than expected. Then he looked up. "This is serious." "Yes." "And you're certain?" 100%. Rihanna presented logical summaries of handwriting matches and delays. Biz provided the route registry. Sev provided technical invoices and recurring forms. The king was silent. Then he said slowly, "If this is true, then the rot runs deeper than I thought." "Yes," said Veal, "but now you know where." The king looked at him. "What do you propose?" Veal didn't hesitate. "A public trial and a redistribution of provincial accounting authority in favor of city offices, where data cannot be falsified by a single person." The king bowed his head. "You want more than just punishment." "No, I want to ensure this never happens again." The trial was a show trial. Art Neal tried to wriggle out of it, blame his subordinates, talk about misunderstandings, clerks' mistakes, and unfortunate coincidences. But the data didn't lie. Rihanna sat in the courtroom and looked at him the way one looks at a shoddy structure before it collapses. The king handed down the sentence himself: removal from office, confiscation of part of his property, assignment to a remote archival center under supervision, a review of the entire provincial reporting system. Laven was not present, but when the news reached him, he realized he had lost an important part of the war. Not everything, but enough for the tide to turn. After the trial, Kyver received what Veal had long wanted to implement officially: the Iron Belt Project. It was not just one city. It was a network: Kyver, administration and defense; Porig, transportation hub; Melgrad, sawmill and woodworking; Vern, stone quarry and lime kilns; Saren, seaport and trade; Gornvetti, textiles and dyeing. Each city had its own specialty. Each handled a part of the production cycle. And each was connected by roads, a unified accounting system, standard measures, weights, and taxes. Sev said at the first council meeting, "This is no longer just a reform." Vil replied, "No, this is a new country." Silence. Biz glanced cautiously at the king, who was present for the first stage of the project's official approval. "Your Majesty, do you permit this?" The king paused for a moment. "I permit whatever strengthens the kingdom." And that was important, because now no one could say that Kyver was a random anomaly. It had become a trend. As the system grew, new people arrived. Not heroes, specialists, each with their own pain and experience. An engineer from the port school appeared, one who knew how to calculate the load on bridges. A female doctor appeared who implemented a sewer system and quarantine zones. A former guild banker appeared who taught the city how to manage a reserve fund. A master supplier appeared who built a warehouse network based on the first in, first out principle, eliminating waste. Kyver was becoming less of a fortress and more of an organism, and Veal finally ceased to be the sole brain in the system. This was very important, because if a city depends on a single person, it is dead, even if it is still breathing. Levin arrived alone, late in the evening, without an entourage. It was surprising and dangerous at the same time. He requested an audience with Veal in his office. When they were alone, the Duke stared at the blueprints on the table for a long time. "You've won," he said. "Not yet. You have. You've destroyed the old dependency. I've created an alternative," Veal replied. Levin nodded. "Exactly." A pause. "You know what I didn't expect?" he asked. "What?" "That people would follow you not because you're noble, but because you're useful." Veal didn't answer. Levin lowered his gaze. "I thought power was the right to take." "And that's a mistake," said Veal. Levin smiled faintly. "I realized it too late." "Late doesn't mean useless." The Duke looked up. In his eyes was not forgiveness, but an acknowledgement of defeat. "You will become more dangerous than any of us," he said. "I already have." And with that, the conversation ended. A year after the trial, the map of the kingdom looked different. Not officially, but in people's minds. People were no longer talking about family estates, but about routes, cities, and production centers. Kyver, fortresses and administration. Porg, logistics. Saren, the sea. Gornvedi, textiles. The Iron Belt, the network that tied it all together into a stable system. Veal wrote in his journal, "The year of the Iron Belt. If we used to build walls, now we're building connectivity." Levin didn't break us. He only accelerated what would have happened anyway. The king understands this better than most. Rihanna already speaks like a chancellor. Sev as an engineer. Mila as an industrialist. Biz as the man who knows the price of everything and the value of more. Ket as a commander. And that's good. Because the city, like the country, must cease to be just a single name. He closed the journal. Outside the window, lights were on in the workshops. Carts were moving along the roads. New guard posts stood by the bridges. And somewhere far away, beyond the hills, the next city was already beginning. A city that did not yet know it would soon change. At one of the new meetings, the king asked Veal a question. "What do you need now?" Veal looked at the map of the kingdom. At the cities. At the roads. At the junctions. At the empty spaces between them. And answered honestly. Schools for administrators. A banking system free of corruption. 2 new industrial centers in the north. And a reform of the recruitment system so that people are no longer sold off by their villages to pay off debts. The king exhaled slowly. "You want to change too much." "No," said Veal. "I want to ensure that the country stops relying on chance." The king looked at him for a long time. Then he smiled. "You are a fearsome man, Lord Montvane. I've been told that before. And yet, it seems you are right." Veal did not smile. He simply nodded. Because he knew, the hardest part was yet to come. Now they were not just saving individual places. Now they were changing an entire kingdom. Veal was wrong about one thing. He thought that what the old order feared most was money. But once the Iron Belt had grown strong, it became clear, more than money, the old order feared people who knew how to think. As long as a peasant simply worked, he could be kept in check by the land. As long as a craftsman was alone, he could be bought. As long as a city depended on a single lord, its path could be blocked. But when schools, standards, record-keeping, interconnected cities, and administrators who understand how the system works appear, power ceases to be an inherited custom. It becomes verifiable. And that is almost a revolution. The king understood this. The lords did too. And that is precisely why the moment came when even Ardurin III ceased to be merely a patron of Kyver and became a player who had to decide. Either support the new country within the old one, or try to stop its growth and risk a civil war. He chose a third option. He tried to steer the reform so that the crown remained on top, but the new system didn't collapse. It was clever and dangerous. The first attack came through the schools. The Royal Council announced that the transfer of technical knowledge and the fundamentals of governance in provincial centers requires verification of compliance with the royal standard. The wording was elegant, but the meaning was simple. Someone wanted to place observers over the schools. Rihanna read the decree and slowly laid it on the table. They want to control what we teach. Yes, said Veal. And who came up with this? People who don't like the fact that children can outsmart them. She exhaled sharply. That's ridiculous. No, he replied. It's logical. Because the logic of power is simple. If the children in the city learn better than the nobles at court, in a generation the nobles will become mere decorations. The king summoned Veal to the capital. Ardurin III received him without unnecessary ceremony. And that in itself meant the conversation would not be easy. The council is pressuring me, the king said without preamble. They believe you are creating a parallel system of power. They are right, Veal replied. The king looked up. Aren't you afraid to say that to my face? No, because it's not a conspiracy. So what? It's infrastructure. Silence. The king smiled slightly. You never answer the way people expect. Because expectations rarely solve problems. The king tapped his fingers on the table. The council demands that royal inspectors be placed in your schools. And you? I want to understand how dangerous they are. Dangerous? Veal asked. Yes, to the old order. Veal paused. If they put people there who will disrupt the program, we'll lose momentum. And if they don't, the council will think I'm giving you too much freedom. You're the king. The king looked at him. And that is precisely why I cannot afford to simply be right. I must hold the country together. Veal nodded slowly. Then a compromise. What kind? Let the crown send not observers, but joint examiners. People who will check the quality of education, but not interfere with the content. The king thought for a moment. What if they interfere? Then it will be obvious to everyone. The king smiled. You're still setting traps for others' greed. I would call it a system of transparent accountability. Of course, the examiners arrived a month later. 3 of them. 1 gray-haired scholar from the capital. 1 female lawyer, sharp and straightforward, with a piercing gaze. 1 military engineer, whose questions immediately revealed him to be a man who understands that practical calculations are more important than fine words. Rihanna met them first. Not as a child, as an administrator. She gave them a tour of the school, showing them the curriculum, the classrooms, the workshop, the library, the sanitation section, the drafting room, and the hall for practical calculations. The old scientist looked on with skepticism at first, then with interest. Is all this in a provincial town? He asked. Yes, Rihanna replied. Who put the program together? The Kyver Council. And you too? Especially me. The lawyer narrowed her eyes. How old are you? Old enough to understand that this is an important question. The engineer chuckled quietly. The old scientist later said to Veal, I expected to see chaos. But I see a system. A system requires people who aren't afraid of numbers, Veal replied. And aren't afraid of authority? Especially not afraid. The examiners were satisfied. The council was not. That was precisely the goal. The first conflict broke out in one of the provincial towns along the Iron Belt. A lord, whose lands had previously been the sole supplier of bread to the district, decided to raise the price of grain to the limit. That was foolish, because now the towns could help each other. Kyver immediately released reserves from his warehouse. Saren sent dried fish. Gornvedi sent cloth in exchange for bread. Porg provided transportation. The lord expected the neighboring towns to compete with one another. Instead, they began to coordinate. Rihanna drew up a trade table, Biz mapped out the routes, Sev calculated delivery times, and Ket ensured the caravan's safety. As a result, the lord lost profit without gaining political leverage. A week later, his men arrived at Kyver with a proposal to revise the terms of cooperation. Veal listened, and for the first time, he allowed himself to do something he had never done before. He did not offer a compromise. He offered a standard. Bread is purchased at a fixed price, he said. A fixed rate for transportation fees. Any increase above market rates will result in shifting purchases to other districts. That's impossible, the Lord's representative protested. It's already possible, Veal replied, and he sent them away empty-handed. The Lord, of course, tried to make threats, but threats no longer worked. Because the old principle of power, without me, you're lost, no longer held sway. Competition had emerged, not destructive, systemic. That was the moment when Veal realized reforms begin to win when people are given a choice. For the first time in this arc, he said at the council, monopolies are harmful even when they're local and familiar. Sev looked up. Even on timber? Especially on timber. Even on schools. All the more so on schools. Rihanna added, if knowledge is controlled by a single source, it begins to lie. Veal looked at her gratefully. Her point was spot on. Realizing that the old lords would not back down, the king established a commission to reform provincial administration, and he appointed Veal to it. It was almost an open declaration. The commission was tasked with examining tax distribution, road maintenance, supply of garrisons, the condition of cities, educational standards, the reporting system, the mechanism for delegating authority to the city level. The lords perceived this as an attack, because that's exactly what it was. But formally, everything looked proper. The first meetings were hell. The dukes argued about the law, the barons about the land, the old advisors about tradition, Veal about the numbers, and the numbers won out. Rihanna, sitting next to him, would sometimes simply nudge the right document his way. Viz made sure the meetings didn't devolve into fruitless arguments. Sev took notes on technical proposals. Kit stood by the door, and that served almost as an argument in itself. Then the question of the army arose. The old order built its troops from men conscripted from villages according to quotas. Poorly trained, poorly supplied, dependent on the lord rather than the system. Veal proposed something different. Not a complete abolition of the militia, a transition to permanent garrison units in strategic cities and training companies for the provinces. This meant a garrison consisting not only of local people but also of professional instructors, centralized training, supply according to standardized norms, weapon repairs in regional workshops, logistics via the transport belt. Kit immediately grasped the idea. This will allow for a faster response to raids. Yes, and the lords will lose control over the people. Exactly. They'll go berserk. Yes. So, it's the right thing to do. Veal looked at him. You're becoming too kind toward my plans. Kit smiled wryly. I've seen for too long what happens without them. To push the reform through, a demonstration was needed. And Veal decided to hold it in Caver. They invited the king, the commission, the lords, and several military observers. They showed them everything. First, the craftsman's school. Then the warehouse inventory. Then the forges. Then the mechanized carts traveling along the rail section from the warehouse to the workshop. Then the water supply and fire protection system. Then the sanitary quarters with a sewer line. Then the training ground, where recruits learned in 6 weeks what used to take months. The lords were silent at first. Then one of them, an elderly and caustic man, said, all this is expensive. Veal did not object. Yes. And why? Because it's cheaper than constantly losing people and property. We haven't done it this way for centuries. And it shows, Rihanna replied calmly. Silence. The king turned away to hide a smile. When arguments stopped working, some decided to stage a provocation. At the training ground, one of the young nobles, too hot-headed and too confident, publicly questioned Veal's childish methods and proposed a test. Let Caver's recruits build a temporary defensive line in an hour, and his men would try to storm it. It was a clear insult, but Veal agreed. All right. Everyone fell silent. What, really? The nobleman asked. Yes. And you're not afraid of losing? No. Why? Veal looked at him calmly. Because this isn't a competition. It's a lesson. He gave a short order. In 25 minutes, Farn and his men erected a field barricade using pre-prepared shields, logs, rubble, and a trench. Ket and the garrison group took up their positions. Sev laid out signal flags and retreat routes. Rihanna noted the time. Then the attack began. And it immediately became clear. The nobleman's retinue knew how to attack, but didn't know how to work as a unit. They were held back, without bloodshed, simply through tactics. The nobleman who had staged the show lost in disgrace. Veal did not humiliate him afterward. He simply said, This is the difference between personal bravery and organized defense. After the demonstration, the king offered Veal a new treaty. Kyver and the Iron Belt Network were to become an experimental macroregion. The gist: cities gain expanded autonomy. The crown introduces uniform basic standards. Provinces transition to mixed governance. Lords retain their titles, but lose some of their monopolistic leverage. The king gains a steady tax revenue stream and a more stable defense. It was a compromise that tore apart the old system, but did not burn the country to the ground. Veal looked at the draft for a long time. Then he said, "This will spark a war with part of the nobility." "Yes," the king acknowledged. "Are you ready?" The king did not answer immediately. "No, but I realize that if we don't do this now, in 10 years the war will be worse." Veal nodded. "Then let's sign it." And they signed it. As soon as the treaty came into force, panic broke out in the country. Not among the people, but among the nobility. That night, letters, messengers, couriers, and secret negotiators flew out from all over the capital. The old families tried to unite against the reforms. Laven, of course, was at the center of it all. But now he was not the leader, but one among many. Art Neo, already removed from office, turned out to be connected to several groups that had used provincial subsidies for personal enrichment. The church was also wavering. Father Ma came to Veal himself. Thinner, tired. "We didn't expect you to go this far," he said. "I wasn't going against the faith, but you're changing the order. An order that made the poor even poorer was not holy." Ma closed his eyes. "You are forcing the church to make a choice." "No," said Veal. "You are already facing a choice. I am simply making it clear." Mock was silent for a long time. Then he asked, "And if part of the church turns against you?" "Then part of the church will turn against a country where children can read and peasants aren't drowning in debt." That was harsh. But Mock understood. An open rebellion broke out in 2 regions simultaneously. One duke blocked the road. Another declared that he would defend the traditional rights of his lands against royal and urban usurpation. Essentially, a rebellion. The king acted quickly. He gathered loyal troops. Veal mobilized the Iron Belt. Kyver sent a garrison. Porrig provided transport. Saren supplied naval provisions. Gornvedi supplied cloth and bandages. Melgrad supplied timber and beams. Vern supplied stone for field fortifications. This was not just an army. It was a network. And that is precisely why the rebellious dukes did not get what they had hoped for: a quick victory over isolated centers. For the first time, Veal was not a rear area builder, but a frontline organizer. He did not command the troops as a general. He built supply lines. A network of warehouses, transshipment points, repair stations, field workshops, and medical stations. Ket was in charge of security. Sev was in charge of equipment. Rihanna was in charge of supply schedules and reports. Biz was in charge of resource allocation. Mila was in charge of armory workshops. Farn was in charge of field fortifications. And it all worked. For the first time, the troops were not marching where they should, but where there was food, tools, arrows, spare axles, and people who knew how to repair bridges after the rain. This broke the old logic of war. The lords expected to have the advantage in noble cavalry. Veal ensured that it was not nobility but the stability of supplies that decided the outcome. The climax came at the southern pass of the old strategic route, which the rebels wanted to capture to cut off the Iron Belt. The battle lasted all day, but the most important thing was not the clash itself, but what Veal had prepared in advance. 2 months earlier, he had ordered 3 narrow sections of the terrain to be fortified: stone embankments, shelters for archers, arrow depots, drainage ditches that turned the lowlands into mud traps. When the rebel forces advanced, they ran into more than just a defense. They ran into infrastructure. The cavalry got bogged down. The infantry lost momentum. Supply wagons couldn't get through because the road had sunk. And in the rear, reserve workshops were already at work, supplying arrows and reinforcements. Ket was a fearsome fighter, but Veal was most fearsome before the battle, because it was he who ensured that the battle could only take place on his terms. After the victory, the king shook Veal's hand personally for the first time, not as a vassal, but as a partner. "Do you realize that after this, they will hate you even more?" "Yes." "And yet you're still building?" "Yes." The king looked at him. "Why?" Veal didn't answer right away. "Because if we stop now, all of this would have been for nothing." "That's almost idealism." "No," said Veal. It's simply a refusal to return to a world where a village dies because it has no right to a road. The king remained silent. Then he said quietly, "You are no longer just a lord. You are the architectural enemy of the old era." Viel smiled faintly. "And you are no longer just a king. You are the only one who has realized that the old era cannot be patched up with minor repairs." The king nodded, and in that nod lay an almost admission. After suppressing the rebellion, the king did something no one expected of him. He supported the project for provincial schools of administration. Not just technical ones, administrative ones. They were to teach accounting, law, transportation, supply, sanitary control, basic economics, crisis management. Rihanna was given the right to draft the curriculum, and she did it in such a way that the old advisors were at first horrified, then furious, then reluctantly agreed. "You're building an entire bureaucracy," Veal told her one evening. Rihanna looked up from her papers. "Yes. Do you realize how scary that is?" "Of course." "And so what?" "They built the old bureaucracy, too, just without schools or a conscience." Veal looked at her and smiled unexpectedly. "That's your best line in a month." "I know." The next step was city councils. Not noble ones. City ones. Elected from among artisans, administrators, craftsmen, teachers, and merchants. Not democracy in the modern sense, no. But no longer a pure feudal hierarchy either. It worked best in Kyver. Biz became secretary of the first council. He grumbled that it was a pointless position, but he did everything perfectly. Mila headed the industrial section. Farn, the construction section. Sev, the engineering section. Rihanna, the accounting section. Ket, security and access control. Veal kept only coordination and the outer perimeter for himself. And he realized, for the first time, he didn't just have people who helped him. He had a system that could survive without him. It was a good feeling, and a terrifying one. Laven hadn't died, hadn't been destroyed, and hadn't disappeared. He'd simply lost the ability to dictate terms. He was still trying. Through connections, through merchants, through secret intermediaries, through church contacts. But the world had already shifted, and the more he resisted, the clearer it became that his power rested not on strength, but on delaying the historical process. Once he came to Veal and Kyver without an entourage. Old, tired, and for the first time, not arrogant. "You haven't defeated me," he said. "I never intended to." "Then what is this?" Veal looked at him. "It's what happens when the system becomes stronger than the individual." Laven smiled bitterly. "Sounds like a curse for us." "Perhaps." Pause. "Did you know it would end this way?" the Duke asked. "No." "Then why did you do it?" Veal looked at the towers of Kyver, at the carts, at the training grounds, at the smoke rising from the workshops. "Because if I hadn't done it, someone else would have started it someday anyway. I just didn't want it to go badly." Laven was silent. Then he asked quietly, "And what will happen to me?" "Life. Is that all?" "It's more than many deserve." Laven nodded, and left. 3 years after the reforms began, the kingdom was already different. Not perfect, not without pain, but different. The provinces got schools. The cities got councils. Roads were standardized. The army had garrison corps and logistics. Supplies were accounted for. Trade routes were established. Land was surveyed. The old houses still stood, but they could no longer pretend that the world had stood still. Veal wrote in his journal, the 3rd year after the royal reform. Kyver is the center of the first regional circuit. The Iron Belt comprises 16 cities and hubs. There are 4 administrative schools, with 7 more under construction. Military garrisons are transitioning to a unified supply system. Resistance from the old nobility has weakened, but it hasn't disappeared. That's normal. Breaking down the old order isn't a single battle. It's a series of decisions, each of which makes turning back more costly. Rihanna says the country is changing faster than the royal chancellery can keep up with issuing seals. That's a good sign. When the world starts to outpace the paperwork, it means it's alive. He set down his quill. Outside the window, the lights of Kyver shone. Somewhere to the south, wheels clattered along the railroad tracks. Somewhere in the port, salt was being unloaded. Somewhere in Hornweddy, the night shift was at work. Somewhere in Porrig, cargo was being counted. And somewhere very far away, they were already beginning to discuss the next step. Not just a city, not just a network, but a new form of kingdom. And that meant history wasn't over yet. It had only just entered its real phase.